Avengers Infinite Wars Chapter 2. Welcome to Naboo. Ringing. The loud, ear-piercing ringing was the first thing that Steve Rogers' senses registered upon awakening. Groaning, Steve had an overwhelming numbness coursing through his body, barely being able to register his hand that it subconsciously went up to clutching his aching head. Straining himself to sit up, Steve felt a solid wall on his back that he had been leaning on. Feeling slowly began to return to his being, rubbing his eyes. Opening them slowly, Steve shut them a second later before opening them again to properly register the lighting. He was in an alleyway that was for sure. Narrow walkway with the opposite wall of the building he was facing being obvious to see. Sensation and relief started to come over him as Steve forced himself to his feet. Wobbling slightly, the Avenger winced from a light that blared in his eyes. Glancing down, he saw his shield lying beside his foot. Letting out a slightly relieved sigh at the sight of something familiar and important to him, Steve grabbed his valued shield up off the ground and placed on his magnetic back harness. The groan close by caught Steve's attention, and he turned to see that it was his stalwart comrade and friend Sam coming to his own as well. "Sam?" Steve said in relief, quickly jogging over to him. "Steve?" Sam asked blearily, shaking his head in an effort to throw off his dizziness. "What the hell happened?" "Your guess is as good as mine," Steve answered, helping his friend to his feet. Leaning against the wall for support, the aviator flexed his hands to get a sense of feeling back as he too was experiencing a kind of numbness all over him. "Where are the others?" Sam inquired, keeping himself steady on the wall. "I don't know," Steve said with a frown. "I just woke up myself and you were the first person I saw." "What do you remember?" Rubbing his head, Sam focused momentarily. "Just the lab and all that weird light with the tech going off like crazy. Then, just waking up here." Looking around, Steve saw the exit to the alleyway a few yards away from them. Glancing back to Sam, Steve went for his earpiece. "Avengers, come in," Steve said with a tinge of hope only to be met with static. Gritting his teeth slightly, Rogers tried once more. "Anyone on comms, come in." Static once more. "Nat." Steve tried again. "Scott." "Rhodey." "Got nothing on my end either, Steve," Sam said dejectedly, finally standing firm on his 2 feet. Steve sighed in defeat, looking up to the sky until turning back to the alleyway exit at the sound of laughter. He spotted kids running by, chasing after something. "Well, they sounded friendly," Sam commented, eyeing their surrounding area. "Did that place teleport us somewhere?" "Maybe," Steve said, taking a step forward. "Only one way to find out really." The two cautiously walked forward and stepped out from the alleyway to find themselves standing in one of the most architecturally beautiful places they had both ever laid eyes on. It just so happens to be the most alien, as both immediately spotted a small group of children walking together, and amongst them were without a doubt extraterrestrials. Some had long faces with fin-like ears, with maybe one or two of them being human in appearance, though completely blue with tail heads, if that's what they would call it. Steve and Sam both soon spotted other very unusual beings stationed around this new area, primarily the more adult version of those fin-eared aliens, and half a dozen people that were clearly soldiers, due to the near-pristine white armor they wore, that covered them from head to toe, posture, and the large rifles each held in hand. "Steve, we are definitely not in Kansas anymore," Sam murmured to Cap, who could only blankly nod his head. "Any ideas, Cap?" Steve looked around, taking into account the white armored soldiers and the other civilians walking around. Up above, he could clearly see ships flying around with a few headed in one direction. Looking forward, Steve saw a ginormous palace in the distance. One could call it kingly and royal in appearance. "They're definitely military," Sam murmured, observing the white armored soldiers standing around. "Maybe they can help us out." From one soldier to another. "Maybe," Steve murmured, rubbing his chin, eyeing the gaggle of kids who were now moving around the terrace, with the head of the group clearly being a teacher. Some had now taken a moment to look over to the two Avengers with curiosity apparent on their faces. It was then that at long last the soldiers who had been standing vigil in this open area noticed the two unusually garbed individuals, both of whom seemed clearly at a loss as to where they were. "Any idea who those guys are?" said the first armored soldier closest to them in their comm link. "No clue." The second one spoke with a shrug of his shoulders. "They Seps." "Don't think so," said the first soldier. "Sergeant Buck, any idea what to do here? They don't look threatening." Sergeant Buck was much easier to distinguish amongst the 6 armored soldier, as out of all of them, he had his helmet and shoulder pads accented with green markings. Stand by, boys, I'll get this all sorted out, Sergeant Buck said, moving forward to meet with these strangers. Both of them noticed his coming approach and faced him tensely with a steely resolve. Their poise, the way they stood, there was no doubt in the sergeant's mind that these two were seasoned warriors. It was clear as day to see. Color him interested. And wary. Identification, sirs. Sergeant Buck said politely enough. Captain Steve Rogers. The blue-suited man said. Lieutenant Sam Wilson. The goggled-eyed said a moment later. Both delivered their introductions in a crisp military-like fashion. But they didn't have identification. However, after spending some time here on this planet and its inhabitants, Buck learned that a candid approach would be needed in certain situations. His gut was telling him this to be one of those times. I'm Sergeant Buck of the Grand Army of the Republic. He introduced himself and saluted them both. Though he did not know of them, their tone and delivery made it clear that they did indeed hold military ranking. Both tilted their heads at the salute, glancing at one another before both saluted him back in turn. Surprising, aside from the guard, not many other people do such a gesture. Not to be rude or anything, Steve Rogers spoke up. But Sam and I here are in a bit of a bind. By bind we mean we have no idea where we are. Sam Wilson bluntly stated, throwing off the sergeant. What? Was Sergeant Buck's response. Look, Steve said in a placating manner. We're not here to cause any trouble at all. That much we can tell you and promise. We were in the middle of a mission to best describe it, and a few unexpected twists happened, and the two of us found ourselves. What is this place anyway? You're in Theed, capital city of Naboo. Buck responded right away. Naboo? Sam and Steve repeated in confusion. What's that? Buck stared at the two of them, somewhat disbelieving in their question. The planet of Naboo. You know, the Naboo. One of the Republic's strongest allies and supporters. The planet of Naboo were the only words that both Avengers registered, slowly turning to look to one another, as to see if neither misheard what Sergeant Buck just said. Another planet. Sam murmured, trying to get a grasp on the situation. Looks like we know what Hydra was working on. Steve whispered back bitterly. Boy, you two alright. You're both stiff as stone right now. Sergeant Buck's accented voice cut through their small talk. Sorry, Steve said, hanging his head slightly. Listen, Sergeant Buck, I'm not sure how exactly we got here, but we are not from this planet for sure. I was kinda starting to figure that. Buck said earnestly. You don't look or dress anything like the people of Naboo here. Shit. Sam cursed. What do we do now, Cap? We got no idea where the others are, let alone the two of us. I don't know, Sam. Steve admitted frustratingly. This is kinda new for me. Sam snorted, shaking his head while crossing his arms in thought. Buck couldn't help but feel a form of sympathy for the two guys standing before him. Both were clearly lost and bit down as they brought up their lost comrades several times. He may have only known the two for a few minutes, but quite honestly, he felt a need to help them. Sergeant Buck then gazed back to his soldiers who were all standing at attention at their posts, though some had their helms turned in his direction. Come on over, boys, they're all right. Buck called out to them. In an instant, the other 5 soldiers approached them. As they drew near, Buck introduced the 2 superheroes to his squad. Brothers, I'd like you all to meet Captain Steve Rogers and Lieutenant Sam Wilson, Sergeant Buck said. Hearing the fact that these 2 men were apparently military and higher rank than even their sergeant, all 5 snapped at attention and saluted both men. Sirs. All 5 in unison said at the same time, sounding exactly the same, piquing Wilson and Rogers' curiosity. They returned the salutes in turn. You all sound the damn same. Sam noted, you guys all brothers or something. Ha. One of them spoke up. You don't know about us. Son, I think it's easy for me to say that both Sam and I have no iota as to what's going on and where we are. Steve said in total honesty. You don't know anything about what's going on? Another asked, the same voice again. At all. The war with the Separatists. The droid army. The Republic. Anything. Easy flapper, let the 2 breath. Sergeant Buck admonished slightly. War? Droid army. Sam reiterated. Where the hell did we land ourselves in? So just to be clear, Buck said to the Avengers. Neither of you have any idea as to the war or anything like that? No? Steve said firmly. Whatever we were expecting, landing in the middle of a war was certainly not on our agenda. Nor was leaving our home planet to begin with. And I thought our lives couldn't get any crazier. Sam Riley stated. Well, you're in luck. The soldier on the far left said with a chipper tone. Naboo is a pretty peaceful planet. Nice and quiet and really beautiful under the night sky. Or in the rising sun, you know, this whole place is pretty amazing actually. Don't mind him. The closest soldier to Sam said in amusement. Jolly fell in love with this planet first time he laid eyes on it. Wants to retire here after the war's all done. Ah, shut up, Rook. The now identified Jolly soldier snarked back. You're just jealous you can't see the beauty of this world. All I see is boredom. Rook shot back. Right, Pack. More or less. Pack agreed affably. Though I do like the fruits. A small banter erupted between the soldiers now, the same voice arguing back and forth amongst them, while Buck only shook his head at his squad's childish behavior. Steve, on the other hand, couldn't fight the growing smirk he had, with a wave of nostalgia washing over him, as he watched the white-armored soldiers bicker back and forth with one another. In the back of his mind, he heard the familiar sound of gunfire, explosions, and then laughter. The laughter of long-lost comrades that he tragically never saw again, save for only one. Sam held a similar expression, chuckling silently at the soldiers who were now getting a bit rowdy with one another, until their sergeant effectively ended their harmless fun. I gotta ask one question though, Sam said to the men. And it was from before, are you guys all brothers? 'Cause damn, you guys sound way too alike. That's the thing, sir. Jolly said, moving to remove his helmet. We are all brothers in a manner of speaking. Both Steve and Sam's eyes widened at the sight of 6 helmets being removed to reveal 6 exact same faces, staring right back at them, with maybe 1 or 2 distinguishing features on each of their faces. Are you guys clones or something? Sam asked. Hey, that's exactly right. Flipper said with a grin. Yeah, we're all members of the clone army of the Grand Republic. Clone army? Steve whispered, now moving to remove his own helm to rub his slightly overwhelmed head. One thing after another. Tell you what. Buck stepped forward. How about my unit and I show you around? Yeah, I'd rather honestly do that than just stand around all day. Rook admitted. Hey Chalk, maybe you'll see your special little lady friend later. Shut up, Rook. Chalk, a clone with bleached chalk white hair, retorted irritably. Least out of all of us, I'm personable enough to get one. Chortling at their behavior, Steve couldn't deny the humorous argument here was rather endearing to him. You know, that tour sounds like a good idea. Sam reasoned, nodding his head at Buck. Get a lay of the land and figure out things from there. No problem. Buck said, helmet back on. Follow us, sirs. You don't need to call us that. Steve said, amused by the gesture. We're not your commanding officers. Force of habit, sirs. Flapper said. It's in our training. By this point, the group of soldiers had arrived in a marketplace. The area was bustling with activity. Humans and other aliens Steve and Sam had yet to identify were conversing, trading, and simply giving off a lively, peaceful vibe. A few other clones were spotted throughout the crowds of people, as they were easily distinguished with their white armor. Why look, they got some new chakroot. Pack said excitedly, moving to walk over to a stand only to get bumped by the butt of Buck's rifle. No drinking on the job, trooper. Buck said sternly. It's for later, Sergeant. Rook said with a grin. We've got to spend our downtime somehow, you know. Sergeant Buck only grumbled beneath his helmet, while Sam only shook his head with an amused grin in place. Steve was observing the area with great interest in the meantime, taking a moment to take in the rather astonishing natural architectural beauty the buildings and environment gave off. He really wished he had a sketch pad on him right now. He wouldn't mind getting a few sketches out of this place. There were also decorations all around the place. He was cut off by his observations when he felt someone bump into his leg. Glancing down, Steve saw that it was a little girl with wavy light brown hair with small flowers decorated around her head like a crown. Sorry about that, Steve said kindly, helping the girl to her feet. It's okay, the young girl said, happily giving him a beaming smile. Here, this is for you. Sorry for bumping into you. Steve caught a brow, giving a small smile at the flower presented to him by the little girl. Why, thank you. Steve accepted graciously. You seem to be carrying a lot of those around. Yup, today is a very special day. The little girl nodded her head vigorously. And what might that be? My friend and I over there aren't from Naboo, so we'd like to know what the fuss is all about. Oh, it's a very special day. The girl said excitedly, bouncing on her toes. It's the 10-year anniversary of the unification of the Naboo and the Gungans. I thought the planet was called Naboo. That's what the people call ourselves. And are those the Gungans? Steve inquired, gesturing to a thin-eared humanoid nearby speaking very strangely and goofily, with what seemed to be a friend. The girl nodded her head. You're very smart for a girl your age. Steve praised, making her eyes light up. What's your name? Ryan Berry. She introduced herself. I'm Steve Rogers. The super soldier patted his chest and gave her a gentlemanly bow, making her giggle at the gesture. Ryu, there you are. An older, motherly voice cut through the crowd. You know not to run off like that. Both had turned to see a middle-aged woman coming up to the two of them, eyeing Ryu. Sorry mommy, I made a new friend. Ryu said sheepishly, looking up to Steve, making her mother face him. She was momentarily thrown off by the unusual garb, but brushed it aside. I hope my daughter didn't cause you any trouble. The mother said in a kind manner, similar to her daughter. No, as a matter of fact, Steve held up the flower he had been given to him by Ryu. She was kind enough to give me a welcoming gift to Naboo. The mother proceeded to give her little girl a proud smile, whilst Ryu blushed at the attention. It is a pleasure to meet you then. Steve Rogers. Cap held his hand out to shake, which she did. Solana Berry. I hope you enjoy your stay here on Naboo. She said pleasantly, moving then to take Ryu's hand. Come along Ryu, Aunt Padme's waiting to see us. Auntie Padme. Ryu said, now jumping with delight, turning back to wave goodbye to Steve. Bye Mr. Rogers. Goodbye Ryu. Steve said in turn, smile on his face as he watched the two depart. Daw, that was adorable, said a familiar teasing voice from behind. And she even called you Mr. Rogers. It's a really great day in the neighborhood. And thus the mood was ruined by Sam as Steve rolled his eyes and turned to face not only Sam's joking grin, but the stifling laughter of the clones that had been accompanying them. Didn't know you were so good with kids, Captain. Pat complimented. That was the sappiest thing I have ever seen. Rook chortled. It's like one of those bad drama holo-vids. Jolly concurred. This was something way too familiar to Steve. Soldiers teasing and japing at his expense. The clones themselves couldn't help it really. There was something about these two that was strangely natural. Maybe it was the air of camaraderie that was easy to see, maybe the battle-hardened eyes that spoke of many conflicts. What it was, these clones didn't know, but it was just so easy to act like this around these two. And they had only known one another for less than an hour. Steve shook his head for annoyance when something in the distance caught his eye. Something that didn't exactly match the tranquil air of the city. Sergeant Buck. Steve spoke up in total seriousness. What exactly are those? Buck quirked a brow and turned to direction of Steve's rather intense gaze, only to balk and swear under his breath. It's those damn seps. Buck exclaimed aloud, rifle held up now. Separatists inbound. The moment Sergeant Buck shouted those two words, pandemonium erupted as all around them, the inhabitants of this planet began to see the ships descending down to them, in turn making them flee for their lives. Clone troopers who were either patrolling or standing around on guard duty, now rushed into action, some shepherding civilians in the direction away from the incoming fight, while the rest were either firing or moving to other positions, in order to prepare for the battle to come. What the hell are they doing here? Flapper shouted asked. This is a Republic stronghold. We've got an entire fleet defending the planet. Crazy clankers. Rook growled out. Vulture droids. Pax shouted. Up above were a dozen unusually shaped four-pincered flying ships that were headed right down at the city below. From the bottom of the vulture droids came small glowing orbs that fell down and began blowing up. The sounds of civilians screaming and fleeing for their lives began to fill the air along with blaster fire. What the hell is going on? Sam exclaimed in disbelief. Why are they attacking a civilian population? Those damn separatists don't give a criffing damn about lives. Buck growled out, readying his rifle. Every Republic world is fair game for them. Let's show those clankers what happens when they mess with the Grand Army of the Republic. Pax said, excited at the prospect of battle. Looks like we're gonna get our chance soon. Rook gestured his head at droid landing craft that had managed to get close enough to the ground on the other side of the terrace. It hovered there momentarily until it began to get bombarded by missiles. Our boys are in the air. Jolly fist pumped at the sight of lot gunships and ARC 170 starfighters that were moving to engage the separatist air forces. And we've gotta move now. Buck commanded. The people of Naboo are under attack, men. Let's hit those clankers with everything we've got. The 6 clones ran off, leaving the 2 Avengers in momentary shock, until Steve and Sam spotted debris on top of a man struggling to escape with several other people, trying to help him escape. Legs moving automatically on its own, Steve was already beside the downed man. Hang on, Steve said to the surrounding civilians, already throwing and pushing off debris they were having trouble with. In a matter of seconds the man was freed and was raised to his feet, thanking Captain Rogers before his companions helped him in escaping from the invading separatist forces. "What do we do, Cap?" Sam asked, very much tense and keeping his eyes in the sky. Gigantic ships high above the planet could be seen quite literally zipping into view with other smaller ships flying down to the surface. "We help the people and get them to safety," Steve said instinctively. "Let's move." "Copy that, Cap." The two broke off into a run, going after the clone troopers they were just speaking with. They heard the sound of blaster fire just up ahead and picked up the pace. Rounding about a corner, it was complete and total chaos. Robots of several variations and size were all over the place firing at other white armored soldiers, while people were fleeing for their lives. Steve spotted Sergeant Buck and his unit using rubble and a nearby shop for cover, with Jolly nursing his arm. They were facing a large platoon of lanky bots that were slowly advancing upon their position. "Sam," Steve said, grabbing his shield. On it, unfurling his wings, Falcon took to the skies and pulled out his SMGs. Captain America sprinted forth at full speed, and with a mighty swing, threw his shield at full force. The spinning disc cleaved through the bots with complete ease. "What's that?" were the last nasally words of one of the bots when it was decapitated by the shield. It bounced around the terrain, cutting through the robots with complete ease. Sam fired his guns, but the bullets only managed to destroy two and dent others. Seeing that they weren't cutting it, Sam dive-bombed them with his wings, shielding him in case of fire. Smashing through the bots, Sam used his thruster pack as a boost to perform a spinning kick corkscrew that sent droids flying into the wall and smashing into pieces. Not taking a moment to rest, Falcon jabbed the top metal part of his wings to bash the droids down. Grabbing two guns on the ground, Sam figured they would prove to be much more effective than his SMGs, and immediately began firing upon the droids while taking to the skies. All the while the display was witnessed by Sergeant Buck, his unit and other clones, all having wide-eyed dropped jaws beneath their helmets. "Holy criff, who the hell are these guys?" Chalk exclaimed in shock. "I don't know, but right now I don't care," Rook said excitedly. "They're scrapping those clankers like a breeze. We've got the advantage, boys," Buck yelled out, stepping out from his cover. "Push forward, brothers." The clones within the vicinity followed in the sergeant's lead, and began to press their counter-attack on the attacking droid army. Cap and Falcon fought in tandem together, wrecking the droid forces. "Hey, who are those two?" one of the lanky droids asked. "I don't know, they're definitely not clones," another said. "Are they GD? They don't look like it. I've never seen a GD move like that." "You've never even seen GD to begin with." "Oh yeah. This is my first bog." The conversation between the droids were promptly put to an end via Cap's shield slicing right through them. Returning to his awaiting hand, Steve charged forth, grabbing a droid by the neck and throwing it with ease at another cluster, before Sam flew by and shot them all down. Cap was then joined by Buck and his unit, who backed him up in repelling the droid forces, along with the many other clones within the area. "Area secured," Flapper announced. "That was incredible," Jolly declared soon after, cheering for Sam and Steve. "How'd you guys do that?" "Yeah," Pack said in equal excitement. "I don't think even GD could move like that." "No time for that." Steve cut them off, taking on a commanding presence which startled all the clones. "Right now, those droids are invading the city and we've got civilians under fire by them. We need to split up. One half takes on the droids, while the rest move to get the civilians to safety." The clones were silent in response to Steve's instructions until Buck spoke up. "Copy that, Captain Rogers." He agreed wholeheartedly, looking to his brothers. "You heard the man, move your asses, we've got a battle to win here." Snapping out of their stupor, the clones divvied themselves up amongst one another, one half staying here with Cap and Falcon, while the rest went off to aid in keeping the civilians of Naboo safe. "What are we dealing with here, Sergeant?" Cap asked straight away. "Landing crafts, couple of cruisers and several droid command stations," Buck listed off. "We spotted mostly vultures, tri-fighters and gunships in the air," Chalk added. "Why exactly would they want to attack Naboo?" Sam questioned. "Judging from the marketplace back there, this place doesn't seem like a military target aside maybe from resources." "There's a number of reasons actually," Jolie said. "Save it for later," Steve said straight away. "Right now, we've got to figure out what would their objective for the attack be." "I think I've got an idea to that," Buck said, eyeing the Palace of Theed. Senators from the Republic had arrived several days ago. One in particular which has quite the history on the planet and the separatists, especially the Trade Federation. Senator Padma Amidala. That name was vaguely familiar to Steve as his short-term memory scrounged to recall where had just heard that name. So this is more personal than anything, Falcon surmised. That'd be my guess, sir, Buck said respectfully. The sound of vulture droids zooming overhead being pursued by ARC-170s interrupted any further conversation and speculation as to why the Sis was attacking. Let's move then. Stay in tight formation, Steve commanded. Long-range troopers I want covering our rears with CQC specialists front and center with me. Sam here will be our eye in the sky. Keep a tight formation and check your corners. Yes, sir, was the resounding reaction from all clones present who were jittery with anticipation. Aside from Sergeant Buck's unit, the rest of them had no clue as to who these two new guys were. But in this short instance, they had displayed battle prowess, awareness and tactics that had eclipsed whatever expectations they held. These two right here, especially the one with the shield. They were definitely worth following. Falling in line, Cap lead from the front with Sam by his side, deploying Reed Wing into the skies for surveillance, while Buck followed up on Steve's other side. We've got some civilians trapped up ahead, Cap, Sam said, his goggles receiving a live feed from Reed Wing. Got a few dozen of those lanky ones we took out, but they've got some bigger, bulkier black ones with them. The lanky ones are the standard B-1 battle droids, Buck chimed in. The larger ones on the other hand are the B-2 super battle droids. Super battle droids, Steve murmured. What are you worried about, Cap? Sam joked. You're already a super soldier, so this should be a cakewalk. Super soldier? The clones all had the same thought on their minds. Cap only rolled his eyes good-naturedly before picking up the pace. Let's move, gentlemen, we've got civilians to save. The clone troopers obliged, picking up after Cap and Falcon into a run until they stopped by Steve holding up his arm for them to wait. Standing nearby a building, Rogers gestured for them to lean against the wall for cover, while pointing at Buck, Chalk and a clone holding a sniper rifle to come forward with him and Sam. Peeking round the corner, the 5 soldiers saw a large contingent of droids all surrounding an equally large group of Naboo, Gungans and even a few clones, who had been stripped of their weapons, along with other uniformed men and women. The captured clones and uniformed individuals were on their knees before the civilians almost intentionally, as they seemed to be making sure the droids paid most of their attention to them, rather than the unarmed people. Do we normally take prisoners? A B-1 battle droid asked a yellow-accented B-1. Not normally, it mused in its high-pitched voice. Not sure about the clones though. Steve's exceptionally enhanced eyes took the time to get a layout of the environment around the droids and their prisoners, taking note of angled walls, a nearby fountain and several tapestries hanging above. Formulating a plan, Steve looked back to the men. Spread out, Steve instructed. Use the stands and booths as cover and wait for my move. Sam, get ready to rain down some fire. You got it, Cap, Sam said, already using Reed Wing and his goggles to mark down targets. You heard him, Buck said. Move out. The clones went in pairs of 2s and 3s, and used the alleyways and food and souvenir stands to surround the droids, while Steve remained where he was with Sam, along with Buck and Pack. Meanwhile the droids were still debating, remaining none the wiser of the impending attack. One of the captured clones, however, had managed to spot brief instances of white armor in between the stands and booths, all getting into position. Grinning beneath his helmet, the clone noticed some of the B-1 battle droids amicably glancing around boredly, while the ones in front of him continued to speak on what to do next. Those air-headed clankers may spot his brothers, so he needed to act fast. Oi clankers, he called out to them, getting everybody's attention. You do know that it's standard procedure for you to feed your captured prisoners, right? Haven't you ever had prisoners before? What is he talking about? A droid asked. I don't know, I've never held prisoners before, another said, turning to the accented B-1 battle droid. What about you, Commander? Have you ever held prisoners? The yellow accented battle droid was put on the spot, quickly trying to recuperate from the sudden questions. He wasn't programmed for this kind of leadership. Of course I have. The commander droid responded in a stammering manner. But I've never fed them before. Then what do we do? Get scrapped, clanker, that's what. The clone said mockingly. It was at that moment a flying disc had completely destroyed the commanding droid, along with a few other unfortunate droids, before bouncing off the wall several times and coming back down for another run-through. It had cut down the hanging decorative tapestry, which in turn fell upon the droids, blindsiding them. "Hey, what's going on?" one of the B-1 droids cried out in panic. "Now?" Falcon fired his missiles from his pack and flew forward along with Cap, who snatched his shield from the air, as the clones who had been hiding sprang out, and in a matter of seconds the droids were all but destroyed. The civilians all let out breaths of relief and gratitude, with a few even cheering for the victory. "Incoming!" flappers shouted. "Judikas!" Several rolling bolts were headed their way until they stopped and unfurled themselves, shields up and firing at them. "Take cover now!" Steve shouted, standing in front of the civilians in order to protect them from fire. Sam had taken to the skies whilst the clones all hid behind stands, booths and the nearby fountain, to avoid the Judika's fire. Several clones sadly were not fast enough and got hit, dying on the spot. Steve moved like a blur to deflect the blaster bolts, making sure not a single one got past him. He even managed to redirect some back at the Judikas, something he did not know his shield was capable of doing so, yet it proved ineffective against the shields. "Anybody have any ideas on how to take these guys out?" Steve shouted aloud. "Sir?" Rook called out. "Their ray shields reflect regular blaster fire, but you can phase through them physically on your own." "You heard that, Sam?" Steve grunted out, deflecting several more blaster bolts. "Loud and clear, Steve," Sam said from above, dive bombing a Judika from above. Buck's information of the Judika's shielding proved true as Sam combined with his weight, downward flight and momentum smashed through a Judika. He then utilized his flight pack to boost himself over to the next set of rollers, and with his wings smacked them back hard before going into the air once more. All the while, the other Judikas were slowly turning themselves to face Falcon, giving the other clones the chance to run forward and bypass the shields, shooting the rolling tin cans down. "Area secured," one of the clones said aloud. "Thanks, brothers." The captured clone who had been a distraction for them said gratefully. "Don't thank us, brother," Rook said, thumbing over to Steve and Sam. "Those two over there did most of the heavy lifting." "Who are they?" another clone had asked. "Tough bastards, that's what," Jolly answered with admiration. Steve took a moment to survey the civilians who were now safe when suddenly, "Mr. Rogers," said a small meek voice. Blinking, Steve saw a small kid force her way through the crowd and saw that it was none other than Ryu Naberi. "Ryu?" Steve said in surprise, approaching her, seeing her mother Sola appear through the crowd as well to stand behind her daughter. "You took out the bad robots." Ryu looked up to him in awe. "I had a lot of help," Steve said, kneeling down to her level, pulling out the flower she had given to him. "And I feel like I owed you for this little flower." Ryu giddily laughed, with Sola smiling down in gratitude. "Thank you so much," Sola said earnestly. "Don't mention it," Steve waved off. His head then snapped up at the sound of starfighters doing battle. "We're not in the clear just yet. We still need to get you all to safety. I believe I can assist with it then." One of the uniformed men with a metal patch on his left eye who had been held prisoner stepped forward. "I'm Captain Grigor Tifo of Royal Naboo Security Forces." The man introduced himself. "I cannot thank you enough for what you and the clone troopers have done here." "Just doing our job," Steve said humbly. "I'm Captain Steve Rogers. That's Lieutenant Sam Wilson." "A pleasure, sir," Grigor said respectfully. "Captain Rogers, I believe the best course of action is follow me and my men back to the Palace of Theed. It is the most fortified location within the city, and the safest place for these civilians and our forces to hold out until aid arrives from the Republic." "What about the rest of the city?" Sam butted in intently. "I understand your concern, sir, but the people here, myself included, understand the importance of getting members of royalty to safety," Grigor argued back. "Royalty?" Steve said in bewilderment until Grigor looked towards Sola and Ryu. Before Steve could say much else, a vulture droid had crash-landed through the fountain, inuring several clones in the process. "Shit," Steve swore, looking to the palace and then back to the civilians. "Alright, make a formation around the civilians," Steve instructed, taking the initiative, jogging over and assisting one of the downed clones. "Injured and children in the center. Stick close to the walls and alleyways for cover. Check your corners and your six at all times. Do not stray away from the group. Grigor, you know the fastest way to the palace." "Course I do, Captain," Grigor promised. "Lead the way then," Steve gestured. "Sam, is Red Wing still in the sky?" "You know it. Keep us updated," Steve said, returning his gaze to the civilians and little Ryu. "Come on people, let's move it." Scene cut. It was complete and utter chaos within the grand palace of Naboo, as the very building struck, and the sounds of battle clear as day echoing through the windows and openings. Within the grand hall were a collection of individuals all being guarded by the Naboo security force and clone troopers. Anti-aircraft guns were used to the fullest along with the shields that were installed not too long after the breakout of the war. Whilst it protected them from rogue fire, droid starfighters were easily able to phase in and out of the shield, thus necessitating the use of the guns in repelling the fighters. Clones and security personnel were stationed across every exit and entrance, fending off wave after wave of droids, holding out strong. The guard of the palace and security force had fought with exceptional aggressiveness, surprising even the clones, as they had not allowed an inch of the palace to fall into the hands of the separatists. In the center of all this was Senator Padme Amidala with her dear friend Senator Bail Organa, and her student and newest Senator Representative Ryu Chuchi. With them was also Queen Jamilia and her brother-in-law Dard Naberi, and his youngest daughter Pruha. She, like Dard, was worried beyond belief at the idea of the Sith brazenly attacking Naboo, even more so with the fact that Sola and Ryu had been unaccounted for. Armed with her own blaster, Padme held a focused and stoic gaze, making sure to help Dard in keeping little Pruha calm as the battle raged on. She was truly frustrated and beyond infuriated at her home planet, being once again attacked by battle droids. Call it a gut feeling, but Padme had an inkling of an idea out of all the separatists, just who it was, that had launched such a bold and daring attack. She wanted to get out there and fight, but she knew it would be smarter to remain here and assist the Queen in keeping the peace within the Grand Hall. This is not what I expected to be for a lesson on foreign politics, Ryu Chuchi said dryly with underlying nervousness. Well, this isn't my first tango with the separatists, Padme said dryly. And this is the second time they've tried their hand on Naboo. 10 years ago, right? Ryo asked, getting a nod out of Padme. They know how to hold a grudge, Padme said, grimacing at the memories of the Trade Federation's oppression of her people. The Republic will be here soon enough. Bail Organa cut in, though his expression was grim. Yet the amount of damage and lives that will be lost, I dread the aftermath in all this. It is war, Senator Organa, Ryo said sympathetically. Yes, Organa had his head down, eyes glazed. War. We'll make it through this, Padme promised, placing her hand on Bail's shoulder. Giving her a grateful smile, Organa moved to speak with Captain Panaka, while Padme surveyed the people. There weren't as many people in the Grand Hall, a few aristocrats and Gungans along with other nobles from royal houses. Padme, Chuchi spoke up, gaining her attention. On the way to the Grand Hall, I heard one of the guards speak of an intruder within the palace. What? Padme said sharply in alarm. I believe Captain Panaka may have answers, Ryo stated, gesturing to said captain who was conversing with Organa. Going over to the both of them, Panaka saw Padme and inclined his head respectfully in her direction. Senator. Captain, Ryo Chuchi has just informed of an intruder within the palace, Padme said in a stern tone. Is this true? Panaka grimaced, but not at all the same. There was an intruder, yes, though this was minutes before the attack. We were unclear as to who it was as he disappeared before our very eyes upon the attack commencing. What do you mean by disappear? Bail inquired. Like stealth technology. Being able to turn invisible. That's not how I would describe it, Panaka said with a furrowed brow and frown. It was more like, is anybody there? Come in, Captain Panaka. A voice had suddenly cut in via the comms. The elder security member recognized the voice immediately. Brigadier Panaka said in relief. Thank the Force, you're alright. Where are you? How's it in the city? It's chaos out here, uncle, but we're holding out, Brigadier answered from his end. I'm traveling with my squad right now with a batch of clones, along with a group of civilians including Senator Padme's sister and niece. We're on our way to the palace right now. Upon hearing this, Padme let out a shaky breath of relief, hand placed over her heart. Dard is going to happy to hear this. Panaka gave her an encouraging smile, returning to speak to Grieger. How far off are you from the palace, Grieger? Not far off, just another few. From the background on Tifo's end came the sound of blaster fire. Grieger, Panaka yelled out in panic. Incoming tank. Grieger shouted from his end, followed by him crying out in pain, only adding to Panaka's fear when an unfamiliar voice was heard. Hold on, Grieger, I got you. You three, stay with Grieger and the civilians. We'll take care of this. The voice spoke in a commanding tone. Grieger, what happened? Is everything alright? Panaka tried speaking with his nephew once more. I'm alive, uncle, don't worry. came Gregor's grunting response. Who was that with you? Padm couldn't help but ask. Senator Amidala, Gregor said in relieved tone. Glad to hear you're alive and well. That was Captain Rogers. He and his ally Lieutenant Wilson have been assisting us in getting the civilians and your family to safety. He saved our lives several times already. Those two move like GD, Senator. I'll be sure to thank them both when they get here, Padm said. And you as well, Gregor. Just make it here. Consider it done. Gregor's line disconnected, making Padm clench her fists tightly. We should help, Padm said determinedly. Is there anything we can do from here? Anything. We can't do much other than escape should the palace get overrun with enemy forces, Panaka said. You know this, Senator. But this isn't the first time we've dealt with something like this, Padm argued back. Yes, but this time we have an army to back us, Panaka countered. Please, Senator, just this once, don't be a hero. Padm shot him a deadpan look at the attempted humor by Panaka, shooting a slight glare at Organa, who snorted. He has a point, you know, Organa said with a bit of a shrug. You're one to talk, Padm shot back. Guilty, Organa admitted with no guilt whatsoever. Their light-hearted mood was cut short by the palace shaking from the shields taking another bombardment. Back outside within the city, Captain America was running in a wide circle to keep the attention of the droid tank on him, as he kept throwing his shield at it, which dented the metal with every throw. The civilians were hidden in a nearby school whilst Cap, Falcon and the clones dealt with the droid infantry and their tank. They had suffered 2 clone losses, one of them tragically being packed, yet they fought on. Due to Cap keeping the tank's focus on him, the clones and Falcon were making quick and efficient work on the droids that were with the tank. Cap had made the cannon rotate in a 180-degree fashion, leaving the front exposed. Picking up his speed, Steve ran around the tank up to its front and climbed up to the hatch. Lining himself up with the primary laser cannon, Steve bashed his shield into the base of the cannon several times to leave a sizable dent. Feeling the entrance hatch beneath his feet shudder, Steve maneuvered back and allowed the hatch to open. Hey, what's going on up here? Said the droid piloting the tank, only to get grabbed by Cap and thrown out of the tank. I need a grenade, Cap yelled out to the clones. Thermal detonator, sir, primed and ready, Rook shouted, tossing Cap's detonator into his hand. Without wasting any movement, as soon as the detonator was in his hands, Cap jumped back and threw it into the tank, with the sounds of droids panicking within before it exploded. Holy smokes, Jolly remarked. These guys are unreal. Man, am I glad they're on our side, Chalk said reverently. Sam landed beside Cap, examining the decimated tank with a raised brow. That display just now. That was just you showing off. Be it ever so humble. The two shared a short laugh, turning back to the regrouped clones, along with the civilians who were filing out from the nearby school. Gregor, Steve addressed the Naboo guard. How much further? We're almost there, Gregor said, being supported by one of his fellow security members clutching his injured side. Incoming, the clone shouted. All heads snapped upwards at a sudden shadow cast overhead. It was a vulture droid falling towards them. Move now, Cap shouted, with everyone scrambling as quickly as possible. The vulture droid crashed into the building that was used for cover, rubble and stone flying out everywhere. Gritting his teeth, Steve got back to his feet a second later to take a moment to survey the damage. All around him were people struggling to get back up, now nursing injuries with some not moving at all. Among those were some of the clones and Naboo forces as well as the civilians. Keeping a growl from escaping, Steve moved to assist the people in getting back up, checking them over. Sam thankfully was in the air at the time and was already back on the ground helping anyone he can. Some of the clones were also uninjured and were now assisting the 2 Avengers. Several more clones perished though, along with the Naboo security guard, including half a dozen civilians. Steve held up an old man when his eyes whitened in dread, running up to the 2 currently unmoving individuals. Sola, Steve said in fear. Ryu. His heartbeat had increased drastically as he placed his 2 fingers upon Sola's neck and let out an exhausted sigh of relief at hearing her pulse. It greatly increased at the sounds of Ryu moaning beside him and slowly opening her eyes. Mr. Rogers, Ryu murmured quietly. Hey there, little princess, Steve said kindly, using himself as a support stand as she grasped his hands and was helped up. Mommy. She's fine. Just sleeping is all, Steve reassured, moving over to see if Sola was still unconscious. Seeing a bruise on the side of her head, Cap placed his shield on top of her, scooped her up his arms. Ryu, Steve said, remaining crouched down. Think you can climb up on my back and hang on tight? Ryu stared up at Cap and then around her nervously, before giving him a firm nod, yet the fear in her eyes remained. Steve. Sam walked up beside him with Sergeant Buck using his shoulder. How bad is it, Sam? Steve asked, feeling Ryu cling tightly on his back. 4 more of my brothers dead, sir. Buck said bitterly. 8 civvies with them and 3 security forces. Think we can move? Steve asked. We're not that far. Grieger's pained voice said from the side, making them look to the Naboo native who was being supported by his own comrades. If we move now, we'll be there in a few minutes. Is everyone ready to move? Steve asked. More or less. Grieger stated. We have no choice really. Then we gotta keep moving. Scene cut. On the east entrance of the Palace of Theed was a large barricade with clones manning every position available, along with the native Naboo guards, who were fighting tooth and nail and keeping the droids back. Though the droids had the numbers, the clones and guards had the tenacity, fighting with unmatched vitriol. They had been fighting for some time now, and though the numbers have indeed whittled down to manageable margin, they were still greatly outnumbered. That was until missiles rained down from above, a circular disc flying and cutting its way through the Sith forces, along with blaster fire coming from behind. The palace soldiers and clones paused in their momentary fire to see just who it is that came to their support, and let out cheers at the sight of other clones, and Naboo guards coming to their aid along with 2 other individuals. As soon as the droids were cleared out, rather than entering the palace right away, their reinforcements turned back and ran around the corner they came from. Confusion changed into realization as the palace forces saw the clones and guards guiding and helping many civilians, some of whom were injured, towards the building. Opening up the barricade, clones and guards rushed out to assist their brethren in their task, creating a defensive corridor for the unarmed civilians. Leading the group were 2 humans that distinctly stood out from all others, one helping a cloned sergeant, while the other had an unconscious woman in his arms and young girl clutching onto his back. Regardless, this was a welcome sight, with the Naboo guards taking charge and directing the civilians and those who were injured to safety. Things might be looking up for the planet of Naboo. Within the palace, word had reached Pat that Grieger, along with his group of clones, guards, civilians and family, had at last made it to the building. Though they were injured, they were safe, which was all Pat needed to hear. Rushing off with Panaka by her side, the senator made her way to the medical wing of the palace. Entering, she was greeted with the less than pleasant sight of clone, guards and innocent people, all strewn about on beds being tended to their wounds. It didn't take long for her in spotting her sister, who had a bandage wrapped around her head with her niece standing right beside her. However, who she did not recognize was the tall individual standing next to little Ryu, whom she had been holding hands with in a very scared manner. He didn't seem bothered by Ryu at all, patting her head in a comforting manner before wiping away her tears, muttering something to her which made her niece smile up at him. Behind was another man, also sporting strange clothing and gear, speaking with Grieger Tifo and a clone sergeant. Ryu. Padme called out to her, making her little niece turn to her. Auntie. Ryu cried out, dashing into her waiting arms, hugging her tightly. I was so worried. Padme said, kissing her temple in a soothing manner. Mommy's hurt. Ryu said with tears streaming down from her eyes. It's okay. Padme said calmly. Your mother is going to be alright. Are you Senator Amidala? Looking up, Padme saw that it was the stranger who Ryu was holding on to before her arrival. She was startled by his sudden appearance, surprised at how much bigger and broader he seemed up close and personal than from afar. This is my Auntie Padme. Ryu said happily to him, pulling away to look up to him with a smile. Good thing then. Steve said kindly, giving her a warm smile of his own. Wouldn't want you running off until your mother woke up. Ryu agreed with a nod until she turned to hug Padme once again, making her aunt giggle at the gesture. Who are you, if I may ask? Padme asked politely, standing up to her full height while picking up Ryu with her. Steve Rogers, ma'am. Steve introduced himself. My associate behind me is my friend and comrade Sam Wilson. They're the reason we made it back alive. Grieger had limped over to the both of them. I thought you were supposed to be recovering, Captain. Steve said, disapproving of Grieger being on his feet. My duty is to check with Senator Amidala first and foremost. Grieger said with a teasing grin. Along with making sure and giving you and your friend Sam most of the credit to so many of us making it here alive. Did Sam tell you to say that? Steve asked knowingly. Didn't need to. Grieger shook his head. Was planning on doing so from the beginning. You protected my people. Padme questioned the good captain, who opened his mouth to speak when another voice cut in. More like saved our asses through the whole trip here. Sergeant Buck called out from his bed, with many of the clones, guards and civilians yelling out in agreement, making Steve shake his head and shoot Sam an amused expression, making the aviator grin and shrug. "Thank you," Padme said earnestly. "Thank you so much. I may have just met you, but you have my undying gratitude." "Think nothing of it, ma'am," Steve said respectfully. "Just doing our duty to help. You saved my niece, my sister, my people, and one of my closest friends." Padme listed off, shooting Grieger a smile, turning back to Steve. "You can call me Padme, Mr. Rogers." Sam couldn't help but snort, making Steve sit him a withering look. "Hey, it's not the best day in the neighborhood, but you can always make it better," Sam joked. Looking back to Amidala, he saw her befuddled expression, making him chuckle softly. "You can just call me Steve, Padme." Scene cut. Once everything was settled and done with down in the medical bay, Cap and Sam were now in the grand hall with other high-ranking officials, politicians and nobles, as they both had been personally brought there by insistence of Padme. They were cordially introduced to many individuals, amongst them being Senators Organa, Chuchi, the Queen, and several others. "Senator Amidala." Steve spoke to her after introductions have been made. "Well, it was pleasant in meeting everyone here. There is still a battle going on out there with many innocent lives still in danger. Do you have a plan or any contingencies when it comes to situations like these?" "Several," Padme answered straight away. "There's the swamplands of the Gungan cities we are allied with, but I fear they too may have been attacked by the separatists. Bunkers are all located around the city, though it may prove to be difficult in getting there with a citywide attack." "What about those flyers in the air?" Sam had inquired. "Since the forces aren't as overwhelming as we thought, the defense fleet above must be holding out strong, though considering how many managed to punch through, I fear how long it can keep up the stalemate," Padme admitted begrudgingly. "Aside from the Gungan cities and a few other locations, this is the most secure city on the planet. The palace is at the very least. Then we'll need to get out there, find a way to direct people in this direction, both clones and civilians," Steve said determinedly. "Otherwise we're just leaving all those people out there to their deaths," Sam agreed. "My oh my, what a pair of truly heroic individuals," said a condescending feminine voice that echoed around the halls, with all going quiet. Many within the halls tensed up at the sound of cackling when from the ceiling above dropped a hooded figure right at the entrance to the chamber. The cloak fell, revealing a lean, fit, ghostly pale and nimble-looking bald woman who eyed Steve and Sam with interest before gazing out at the assembled people within the room. "So many Republican supporters all in one room," the pale woman said with malicious glee, her eyes landing on Padme, who had her arm trailing over her blaster. "And I can't believe my luck. Senator Amidala. What an honor." She bowed. "Dooku and Gunray would prefer speaking with you in person." "I know who you are," Padme said, glaring at the pale woman. "You're that assassin under Dooku. Ventress." "Oh, she even knows me," Ventress said in faux astonishment. "Then you should know me properly before I take you and kill your friends. Asajj Ventress, at your service." "You're not taking her anywhere," Steve said stoically, stepping in front of Padme with Sam by his side. By this point, clones and guards within the room had their weapons leveled at the assassin, making Asajj grin. Boys, let's not do anything drastic," Asajj said lightheartedly when she unleashed some kind of invisible force that knocked away many, and made Steve fall to his back, only to instinctively kick back up to his feet, whilst Sam responded by taking to the air. Asajj cocked a brow at Falcon and Steve, who remained relatively unaffected by her force push. "She's an enhanced," Sam said, pulling out guns that came from his suit, while Cap had his shield in hand. Asajj couldn't help but laugh mockingly, gazing at the two in humor. "Oh, so you two wish to play with me?" Asajj unclipped two curved hilts from her belt and ignited blazing red laser swords. "You know, you talk like every generic bad guy we've met," Sam said, boredly dismissing her threat rather casually, which rather irked her. These two clearly did not know with whom they were dealing with, so she decided to show them. But the Force, it spoke to her, warning her to be wary and not to treat these two lightly. Something was off, yet Ventress ignored the Force in favor of attacking her two would-be victims. In a burst of speed, Ventress leaped forward with her sabers raised above her. She first assumed that the man would be thrown off by her speed, only to be surprised by how quickly he responded with a jumping roundhouse kick to her gut, which sent her flying back. Landing her feet, Asajj felt the Force warn her and reflexively shot her lightsabers up to defend herself from the bullets Sam fired at her. What she did not expect, however, was rather than the bullets being deflected like one would usually expect, the bullets melted, and a few globs of superheated liquefied metal got on her skin. Hissing in pain, Asajj threw out another force push on Sam, who only flew back with his wings, keeping him stable. Looking up to him, Asajj sneered in spite. "Slug throwers. You must come from quite the primitive backwater planet to use those poor toys." "Really? Then why's your face all singed up?" Sam taunted, giving her a wry grin. "I'll show you, Singe." Asajj snarled with venom. Using the force to enhance the speed and power of her body, Ventress went on the attack once more, momentarily throwing Steve off balance, but the seasoned soldier recuperated in time. He grabbed one of her wrists while using his shield to jab her other hand, knocking her blade out of it, and the two briefly entered into a power struggle, until Steve clenched his teeth and with his enhanced strength, threw her into the air, and Sam landed a powerful double boot kick to her side. Asajj fell to the ground hard, letting out a cough. "Stay down," Steve warned with the Sam landing beside him, guns trailed on her. By this point, many of the clones and guards had recovered with their own weapons pointed in her direction. Asajj Ventress could only glare in spite at the shield bearer and flyer. In a short amount of time, the two had absolutely humiliated her with near-practiced ease. Who were these two individuals? And how dared they do such a thing to the apprentice of Count Dooku? Asajj, much as she knew it would be better to flee rather than fight, felt a bubbling anger within her. She wanted to kill these two so badly right now, after publicly showing all those she had been sent to assassinate, that she was so easily bested. No, this would not standing. Seething, Asajj called upon the dark side of the Force, and unleashed yet another Force shockwave, this one being powerful enough to send the surrounding soldiers back once again, this time knocking out a few. Steve and Sam landed hard on the ground, completely taken off guard by the display of power. Many of the nobles and politicians were also thrown back to the ground. Asajj saw her downed opponents and jumped forth, her weapons ignited once again in a downward killing fashion. Steve raised his shield up in defense, though noticed Sam was still dazed. Ventress picked up on this and was about to redirect herself onto Wilson, when an unseen force struck her right in the jaw. Going bug-eyed by the strike, Asajj was sent careening back and landed hard upon the floor, clutching her jaw. Steve sat up and to his utmost relief, saw a very familiar person quite literally grow into full view. "Scott," Steve said, rising to his feet. "Hey Cap." Scott Lang aka the Ant-Man greeted, helmet retracting to reveal a grinning face. "Boy, am I glad to see you guys. You're not the only one, tic-tac." Sam grunted from his position on the ground. Scott and Steve moved to grab both his arms and raised him back up. "Hey Cap, I know this is an awkward and weird time to ask, but who is she? Where are we and where is everyone else?" Scott asked in rapid succession. "We'll focus on that later, Scott," Steve said, eyeing Asajj, who had stumbled back to her own feet. "We've got to deal with her first." "Right, okay, you're right, that makes sense," Scott said, helmet flipping back on. Falcon's wings sprung out again with his guns back in hand, and he hovered above. Asajj now knew that she was outmatched and completely outclassed. That new guide displayed a power she had never seen before, and along with the other two's skills she realized it would not be that much of a fight. So she could do the only thing that made sense to her right now. Run away. Deploying a smoke pellet from her belt, Asajj ran off from the Grand Hall, leaving the trio staring at where she once stood. Well, that was anticlimactic. Sam mused, holstering his guns. "Kinda scared her off basically," Scott remarked with a shrug. "Yes," Steve murmured, placing his shield on his back. His eyes narrowed at the thought of this Ventress until he felt many, many eyes upon him. Turning back to the assembled crowd, all he saw were wide-eyed, dropped jaws looks of complete and utter astonishment and awe. Scott and Sam turned to face them, with the former cringing a bit under all the pressure. "So a Cap," Scott whispered next to him. "About earlier. Where are we?" Steve only sighed, upon realizing just how much more insane and crazier his life as well as the rest of the Avengers had just become. "I don't know, Scott, but I think saying it's a long story isn't even gonna come close to cutting it. So we're not in Kansas anymore then?" "Already said that, tic-tac, try to keep up." Steve snorted, all the while trailing his gaze over the people who had watched them fight back the assassin without much of a struggle. All the while, his thoughts were on the rest of his team, home, and just what to do next in this situation, remaining none the wiser of the monumental shift he, along with his scattered Avengers, had just caused by appearing within the galaxy.